50 years ago, I was just another missionary in the South German mission. Loving what I was doing. I had studied German hard. I had studied German history. I loved Bismarck. I loved the people I was talking to. And all of that is, in a way, putting in place things that I believe the Lord could make use of. I mean, so many things had to fall into place for me to be in the right place at the right time, for this experience to happen to me. But it happens to a lot of people in their own ways, as God works with us to make us instruments in His hand. I mean, why was I sent to Regensburg, of all places? It was the center of the Counter-Reformation. Lots of Catholic scholars there, and a priest's seminary. Our little branch met right across Domplatz, right next to the old medieval cathedral of Regensburg. But right next to the cathedral was a bulletin board where they placed notices about lectures and classes that were being taught. I just happened, of course, to look at that particular posting to see what was coming up for the summertime. And there I found a class that was going to be taught every Friday in the priest's seminary, which was only about 2 blocks down the street from where we lived. This class was on the New Testament. Well, it just happened that Friday was our diversion day, as we called it, the time when we could do whatever we wanted with the morning. And in fact, we were encouraged to be involved in cultural activities, to go to museums. So I felt comfortable going with my companion and just walking into that class. We didn't wear name tags in those days, and so the professor didn't know who we were. I don't know what he thought. Maybe he didn't even notice us. But I noticed him. And, it just happened that he had just read a book by Paul Gechter, a Jesuit priest, a professor at the University of Innsbruck, about the literary art in the Gospel of Matthew. And he was excited to tell us how he saw the presence of what Gechter called Hebraic forms in the Gospel of Matthew as strong evidence of the authenticity of Matthew as having been written originally in a Hebrew form. Well, I was really curious about that. I was intrigued, for one thing, I'd never heard of the word chiasmus before. So as we left the lecture, we went directly to the Catholic bookstore, which again was just 2 doors down from our apartment. And what are the chances that they would have had that little monograph right there on their shelf? I think I bought the only one they had. I loved the book and spent the next week really enjoying reading and learning there about chiasms at the word level, as well as macro-chiasms, conceptual organizational patterns that organized the entire Gospel of Matthew into 7 sections. Well, that was satisfying enough to me. I was excited and I was ready to kind of leave it at that. But the turning point, and it was a life-changing event in my life that occurred quite unexpectedly, early in the morning, August 16th, 1967, when I was awakened by arresting words. And the words were, if it is evidence of Hebrew style in the Bible, it must be evidence of Hebrew style in the Book of Mormon. I was wide awake. I got out of bed. I went over to the table where we had finished our scripture study the night before, and there was my Book of Mormon. I sat down and asked, if it's here, where? And I felt, well, just start reading where you left off last night, which was in the middle of King Benjamin's speech. I read through chapter 4 of Mosiah and turned the page on Mosiah chapter 5 and was almost ready to go back to bed when I glanced down the column, and there were the 2 words, Übertretung, Übertretung, one stacked right on top of the other, and progressing forward and backward from that center point were matching words, blotted out, remember, remember, left hand of God, called name. There it was. That was an exciting moment. I went over and woke up my companion and told him, and we began telling everyone, people on the street, professors, theologians, I would soon write to Paul Gector himself and would visit him. And before I flew home, I traveled with my younger brother and sister for a couple weeks. But on that trip, we stopped in Innsbruck, where I was able to see Paul Gector. I remember that conversation that I had with Paul Gector quite clearly. We talked sitting quite close to each other, back and forth, looking at the same books and papers. And I know that I kept him a lot longer than he planned. But he turned to me, and in a very fatherly way, and he was in his 80s at that point, looked at me and sincerely thanked me for coming to talk to him and said, "You are a lucky young man. You have found a life's work," and encouraged me to go forward with it and to see where it would lead. Looking back from this point to 50 years ago and how little we knew about chiasmus and lots of other things at that time only makes me wonder what lies ahead for all of us 50 years hence. We now know so much more about biblical texts, manuscripts, language, history, culture, theology, doctrine, and the value of the plain and precious things that are in the Scriptures for us to know and appreciate. What will we know if we continue on this path and the Lord is invited into our lives? We are promised in the Book of Mormon that mysteries will be opened unto us, but only according to our heed and diligence. And chiasmus, for me, is not just a mechanical, statistical kind of thing. But with chiasmus, things that were not in focus click into focus. Things that were chaotic become organized. And chiasmus, in a way, is not just the structural organizing of biblical thought. When you think of the words of Jesus himself, so often a chiastic inversion was the lifeblood of what he wanted us to realize, that if we want to find our life, we must lose it. And those who will lose their life for my sake shall find it. Now, there's something about the reversal, the turning about. It has a lot to do with conversion, being turned. You have to be turned on a center point of some kind. So often it is the Lord, Jehovah, Jesus. They are the center point, not only in a literary sense, but in a structural sense, almost saying to us, don't miss this one. Did you get it? Did you really get it?